All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Upskill&Chill. I'll be your solo host today, Courtney. Spencer is out of town still. He's got another beautiful week of vacation, so he'll be rejoining us next week. But until then, I'll be piloting the ship. Okay. It's been a crazy week. Just a little catch up. I've had an interview. I didn't feel the greatest about it, to be honest, but I did make it to the next round. So here I am, studying my system design, my data structures and algorithms, continuing to practice talking about my own experience in the coding world and what I can do, learning how to sell myself. Luckily, I have this Upskill&Chill stream to always practice with. It's certainly helped me become more comfortable with speaking about code and thinking critically about code out loud, which I think is a somewhat different skill from simply speaking about it. But keep your fingers crossed for me. Right. So last week, or rather 2 weeks ago, I was working on developing tests for our various components inside of our to-do list app. And one place I got stuck was testing API calls. So I want to pick back up on trying to write a test to test what our output is from our API and making sure that we're actually getting what we expect to get, given a certain number of inputs, a certain set of inputs, you might even say. I still don't fully understand how Jest handles async. In fact, I'm 90% sure that it's not meant to, mostly because the Next.js docs seem to mention that. Yet I do see a lot of tutorials online that seem to show functions being tested asynchronously. So we're gonna try. It's sometimes a little confusing when you first get started, simply because it's a lot of implementing multiple testing libraries. So it's not just Jest, but there's also the React testing library, and it's important to know which methods come from which library and where you're actually pulling these useful tools from. So that's something that we will certainly be exploring. With that said, again, I didn't prepare anything in terms of music to share. I think we'll keep that going once Spencer's back. So, with that said, sorry, just making sure the stream health is okay. We will dive in. I didn't prep for this particular episode, so we're picking up right where we left off, and we're gonna see what we can do. I'm gonna write these tests and just see if we can actually get the responses that we're looking for from our API, all within Next. Okay, so let's go ahead and share screen and get started here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's a page where we're putting out a new list. I wanted to something like the handle change function. Not necessarily at this point because I need to actually test functionality, but I was just curious if I could. Like, am I able to figure out how to test the inputs and check that they're actually coming back correctly? And to do that, we're going to create a new test. We'll call this to-do.test.tsx. And let's just do a little mirroring here. We'll go ahead and import this testing library. In fact, I'll import both of these. And then we're going to import to do from its own particular component. In fact, how are we exporting to do? Is it a default export? Tis. Okay. All right. Have our app. This will be inside of to do. Excellent. Okay, and I'll probably be referring back to this page test just to make sure I'm actually writing all this code out correctly. Okay, so we'll start with the describe function. Going to test to do component. We'll say UI and functionality. And, oops, this is actually going to be an arrow function. What happened to my comma? There we go. Now it's happy. All is well with the world again. Okay. So let's take a look at our to-do page. I'm going to go ahead and split my screen here. Okay, so what do we want to actually do? I'm just going to go ahead and comment a few things. So one thing I learned from a little more research into testing, this wasn't necessarily intuitive for me, but there's a common set of wisdom that you don't want to test hooks. The reason being, they're already tested by the React dev team. They're in fact thoroughly tested, and we shouldn't need to necessarily test that if I run set tasks, for an instance, that it take that as a given at this point. What's actually creating? So with that in mind, where are we? Handle changes up here. Okay, so we want to, we need to render the component first. It's a very big first step. We'll need to target the input, or an input at least. We'll say task name for now. Luckily, we've given these all name properties, so that should be easy enough. And then we want to enter text. Okay. This is where I'm unsure. I wonder if I'm supposed to call upon the actual handler within this component, or if I'm just supposed to evaluate the actual value. What's interesting that I'm just realizing, I'm unsure if we've actually connected the value of our tasks to the individual inputs. I'm going to take just a moment here just to see if it actually changes anything, and let's go ahead and fire this up to folder edit. What I mean is, inputs have a value component, and I know that we were attempting to build components. I think usually, could be wrong, but usually you actually connect the value inside of one of the states that you're tracking to the value inside the input. So for instance, this is task name. We'll need to connect this to, we'll call this task.task name. Very good. And I'll go ahead and complete that for the others too. This might be something I undo next week. I'm sure there's a reason we missed this, but you never know. Task.description. Got it. lastly, we have our select component, the default value being 1. So let's do a little research here. When it comes to select components, how do we connect the value of the select component, meaning the dropdown, to what's actually inside of our state? Default value, is that right? Okay. Part of why this even occurred to me is I've been working a lot with forms and connecting values to state inside my components. Not updating the default value. Okay. This is almost what I was looking for. Using React Select, that is not a library we're using. How can I set the values? It's funny, the more used to reading answers on Stack Overflow I get, the less I even read the initial question. I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or not, but I actually often find that I very quickly get to the answers I need by just looking at the top answer or the top two answers and evaluating if the question was relevant based on the answer. The question askers are not always as clear as I'd like them to be. Okay. Well, this is asking for a lot of questions here about React Select, which I think is a library. So let's go back here. I just want to try something. We have a default value selected. Can I just assign a value? We'll call this task dot priority. Well, so far so good. TypeScript seems happy, and you know how it is. Happy TypeScript, happy JavaScript. We'll get into our app. Ah, yes. Look at that serene vanilla. Okay, so task, make sure we connect. We'll keep this simple. Connect state to values, description for controlled components. The value prop needs to be connected to, look at that spelling, connected to state directly. I'm gonna go ahead and put this at a high priority. We'll submit it. Beautiful. We even have our ID here. Good, good, good. Okay. Okay, so now we've done that. I'm gonna go ahead and save that change. Just to review, I added a value prop to all of our inputs, and I connected the specific key value from each member of our state that actually has an input, corresponding input. So that would be our task name, our description, and our priority. Okay. Now, with that in mind, just to make sure here, the options that we're passing through, where are we even passing options? Oh, I suppose we're passing them down like this. That's right. For each item in priority options map. Let me just go back and review what priority options is. This is an easy way to make a mistake. Ah, yes. Set up our map last time. Okay, good. Value, label. Got it. Okay. So this should not cause any issues with our functionality. Okay, so back to our page. Yes, I was going to go ahead and commit this. So we're just going to add src app. There is only the one file that needs saving. Good. It's so strange to me how hard it is to write like a commit message and also speak it out loud for all of your benefit. I know you can see the message. I often feel like I need to actually talk it out as well as write it, but I think there are certain things that probably don't need to be deliberately spoken. We'll leave it at that for this. Okay. So we have our values linked up. Oh, I know what I want to do. There was one more thing. So you notice I submitted. We have a new task, connect state to values. For controlled components, the value prop needs to be connected to the state directly. That's great. However, notice that these fields are still filled in with the original what do you call it? The original, not the original values, but the values I just entered. I think one thing we want to do is actually clear the state of all of these inputs. We don't necessarily want them to be filled in with what we entered last. I think for one, you don't want to accidentally submit multiple, but also I think visually to the user, a user is used to if something is submitted, it clears the fields. So we're going to go ahead and implement a bit of logic on that. Look at this. We've already gotten so far from testing. I'm not mad at it though. I think what we can do, since we're using an object in terms of our state, let's set up a default state. I'm just going to call this default task, and we can go ahead and type this as a task, and we'll actually just pass all of this in. Good. Okay, and then what we can do for our actual task here is set it equal to default task. Okay, excellent. And then what we can do is when we submit, the last thing we can do inside the body of submit, let's see. Let me make sure I remember what we're doing here. So we make a call to our API. It returns a response. If the response is okay, we get tasks. That's right. And so if the response is okay, we'll go ahead and set task to default task. This should return our form back to its original state. Okay. I'll write us another to-do item. Continue testing. Test the state of controlled components after submit. Put this at a medium priority. Okay, beautiful. And when you look at this, everything was set back to its default state. That's exactly the behavior we wanted. Excellent. So I will go ahead and add this commit as well. Excellent. Okay, great. Coming back to that, I would definitely say that this is a complete task. This is not the way that we want to handle tasks, I think, what I'm about to do. But in the interest of not getting too cluttered here, I'm actually going to go ahead and remove both of these. And the way I'm going to do it, I could navigate straight into our database and just delete the records from there. But what I actually want to do is use this as an opportunity to build our delete route. And this shouldn't take more than just a moment. So last week, I opened up an ID route or endpoint. So it would be task ID /task/ID, in which it's a specific version of the task endpoint where we're in the URL. We're also passing an ID, and this allows us to perform REST or CRUD functions on specific um, entries inside of our database. So in this case, last week I built just the get or the read function, meaning we can just return a specific task based on its ID. But right now, let's go ahead and grab the delete, or let's build rather the delete function. We'll have our request. We'll pass in some params, and luckily it's going to be the same thing, rec params. Okay. Go ahead and get rid of this console log up here. We're going to say, we're going to call this deleted task. So we're going to take, not Prisma, oh gosh, not again. Prisma.task.delete. And we're going to pass in the ID from our parameters. And we'll go ahead and return the actual deleted task in this response. This is mostly for us to make sure that we actually deleted the correct task. We won't actually need the task itself. And let me do something here. Always good to know your status codes. Status code for successful deletion. I see. So we'll pass to 200 because we're actually going to pass information back, which is what we're going to send the deleted member, or the deleted task rather. We could pass 202, which would mean that it was accepted, but the action hasn't been enacted. I don't think that would be accurate. And we could pass 204, something I've used in the past. You don't always really need to send the deleted task or document that you're removing from your database. Um, and that is probably where we'll settle in the long run. But just for now, just to make sure that I know we're actually deleting the correct task, we're going to go ahead and submit a 200, because if you pass 204, you'll get an error if you try to actually send other information. Or maybe it's not an error, but I think you get you're still only going to get the 204. We'll pass 200. Okay, and then let's pull up our handy dandy Postman. Okay, so we're going to open up a new one and do our delete route. Let's just copy this. Okay, this will actually require me to navigate into our database, so let's go ahead and do that. Our neon console. Excellent. So we'll go into tables. Oh, that's right. Okay, so let's see. Connect. Okay, this is the right one. Go ahead and copy this ID. We'll head back over here. We're going to pass that ID as a parameter in our URL. Send. Okay, good. This should have deleted the actual entry. We'll double check this. We could check in here, and that's important too. But I believe if we just refresh this page, it should no longer exist. And so when it calls, yes. What is all this? Okay, this is something to research because this is about a selected element. But at least for the time being, we know that there's no more. Let's see, which one did we remove? The connect state to values field. But we did get this error, so let's complete this before we actually remove the other task. So within our page again. Right, so it has an issue with the fact that we're passing both a default value and a value. So I think we can actually remove the default value because we're already providing a default value through our default task. So I think if I remove this, and we refresh the page, there should be no more error. And sure enough, no error to submit. Does this still change things? Yes, we changed it to a high priority task. I change it down to medium, down to good. I love when things work. Okay, so let's delete this other entry then. After I commit this change, excellent. Okay. And it does appear that our delete function is working correctly as well. So I will go ahead and settle on just sending back a 204 status for now. We're not going to use deleted tasks, so I think we can go ahead and leave it at that. As soon as we've deleted, we'll just pass a successful a successful or a success message, a success status code that requires no other information. So let's test that as well. We're going to go ahead and delete this record. Let's see what happens. And here's our response, status 204. Interesting that it's actually status 200 though. Something to look into, how we can actually send the correct status code. This actually does not, it seems this does not count as actually passing the status. Perhaps an issue for another day though. Okay, so this is good. We'll go ahead and save our changes here. I always like to check the status to make sure I'm not committing changes that I wasn't ready to commit. Good. Just our route file that we're in here. Okay. So woohoo, we have another endpoint. The only one that we really need to consider adding at this point is an update route, a put or a patch. Spoiler alert, I prefer patch in this case. We'll get to that later. Let's return to our testing. That was the actual original reason for all of this. Quite a diversion we just took. Okay, so where were we? So we render our component. We're going to target the correct input. In this case, actually, I suppose I can go back to our page. In this case, we'll target our ID. And the reason is I saw that the value was not controlled. And so we went on our little side quest there, which is really part of the main quest, if you think about it. But just to set up our controlled component, now it's fully controlled. And then we're going to enter text. And so what did we want to do? We wanted to test the handle change function. So as far as I can tell, you cannot, I don't think in a test, not with Jest at least, I do not think it works in a way where I could, excuse me, where I could render the component and then do something like component dot handle change and actually directly run the change. I think what I have to do is actually trigger the change in a way that the user would, which is entering text into an input. And so if we do that, in a sense, we are testing the set function, but we're also testing that the correct value is really being passed in from our handle change function. So I'm going to go ahead and do this just to even see if we can get this particular test done. And we'll worry about whether this is actually the correct design path or not later. So last thing we'll need to do is check that text is set correctly. Okay. So let's go ahead and do all this inside of an it function. Should set text inside text name correctly. We're going to go ahead and pass our callback function. Oops. Did I not pass a set of curly braces? Silly me. There we go. Okay, so first things first, we need to render the component. So we're going to go ahead and copy from here. We're going to use the render method from the React testing library. So remember, this is from the React testing library. And just to double check, I'll on our page, we link to this, so this is actually part of its own route. We don't have to pass any prompts. Good. Okay, so we render our component, no problem. Now, to target the input, we're going to call this a task name. We'll call this task name input. We're going to use this screen, either property or method on, I guess it's a property, from the React testing library. And let's do get by, is there a get by name? Label text, we'll say, get by label text, task name. And just to double check that that's actually what it's called. I suppose label text will probably be task. Let's actually try this. Okay. Let's run our test. Okay, so what was our error? Is this a console log handle change? Fetch is not defined. Oh, I see. This is actually displaying the console logs from our component. That's fine. Fetch is not defined. So on page.tsx2516, so it doesn't like async functions apparently, or we haven't defined fetch. Not too worried about that. Just out of curiosity, I suppose we weren't actually testing a fetch component or a component that has to access that before, because we were just testing the home page. Okay. Unable to find a label with the text of task name. Ignored nodes, comment, script style. So I suppose the label would read task. Let's try that out. Well, now it passed. That's good. That means that we did find it. Type input. Anything else I can use to identify it? Okay. That's fine for now. We know we're going to enter text. So how do we enter text? I think this is going to require setting up a user event. Okay. This isn't it. User event. Okay. Where is user event coming from? Testing library slash user event. Okay. Let's bring that in and see if it's actually present here, or if that's something we'll have to install. I see. Okay. Okay. So it looks like we'll install this. Oh, here. Install this. Go ahead and copy this. So we're going to bring in the user event because we want to actually simulate the user typing in particular messages, text, that kind of thing. Okay. And it looks like we're happy again. Okay. So it looks like one other thing we'll need to do is set up user. So how were they doing this? Okay, so they declare a user. Okay, good. Okay, so now the user can perform the actual event. Okay. So let's look for. So these are pointer events. Okay, keyboard. Nice. Okay. Okay, so we'll use type. So what do we pass into type? That's the element and the text. Okay. So the element is going to be task name input. The text will be pick up groceries. We don't like this. Why is this? Argument of type HTML. Oh, okay. It's not assignable to parameter of type. Oh. Hmm. Interesting. I'll just go ahead and write this last test. We'll come back to this. Expect input have value pick up groceries. Probably should have copied that just to avoid a user issue. Let's do that. I'm sure I spelled it the same, but I'd love to not run into this issue in the future. Okay, so argument of type HTML element array. Is it an array? Oh, get all by label text. We don't want get all. That would be why. Ah, all is well with the world again. Okay, so I think we can go ahead and run this. Let's see if this actually works. And just to review, we've set up a user by setting up our user event. We render our to-do app. We navigate and find the actual input that has a label called task. And then we have the user type into that task name input, pick up groceries. And then we expect that the input will have the value pick up groceries. All right, let's run it. Uh-oh, one failed. What happened? Expect element to have value pick up groceries. Maybe it's not have value. Maybe we're looking for something else. How to test what text inside input is just. Oh, wait. Is that how this works? Let's try it. I don't think this is the answer. But we will see. Do you like that more? Oh, okay. Well, maybe that is the answer. Oh, sure enough. This is the state. Pick up groceries. And actually, you can see that it is simulating several different, I guess it's for every letter. We have one of these console logs, which makes sense because it actually changes. It updates the state every time there's a keystroke. The way that we have our to-do app set up through our handle change. Every time there's a change, all this code runs. But okay, so we got a successful test. I'm going to go ahead and save this test. Unit test. Handle change. And to-do component. Awesome. So you can see like the strength of this. I think ultimately I've seen multiple sort of design flows for when it comes to how you build your tests. And it seems like one way of thinking is that you have you have like an idea of what you want your component to be and do, and so you build all your tests before you even start building your component, and then you use the tests to guide the building of the component itself. So based on what you wrote in your test, you're going to keep building features or UI into your component. You run your tests and you'll see, checking along the way, is this actually performing the way I expected? Is everything um, working the way I like? And one thing is, the reason I knew to add in this bit of code here where we actually, after we submit and get a response for one of our to-do items, one of our tasks, is that you should reset the fields to default, is because I've been testing on another app I'm building. And when I was testing, one thing I noticed was that the test that wasn't passing is that I wasn't getting a blank state back in one of my own projects for a controlled component. And so then I knew, okay, I need to deliberately set that component back to its default state after I've submitted. That I think that's just a small bit of the strength of actually testing, even unit testing. We are doing unit testing right now, which and actually I should look into the definitions. Let's do a little bit of that before we leave here today. But unit versus integration. I know this is not an end-to-end test, which is sort of like a complete from beginning to end. Okay. Black box testing. For unit testing, accessibility of code is required as it tests the written code, while for integration testing, access to code is not required since it tests the interactions and interfaces between modules. So I believe we are performing unit testing based off of this definition. We're taking a really granular bit of functionality. All we're really doing is testing. If we update our input, does our state, or does the state, because it is a controlled input and the state is tied to the actual value of the input, does that also update correspondingly? And we saw that. We saw that a little bit indirectly, but every time, let's see, every time something changes, we are console logging our tasks. No, that's not the console log I'm looking for. Hold on. Oh, here we go. So this is the handle change task. Yeah, so every time there's a keystroke, we are updating our task object, specifically the task name, which means that this console log runs again. And so you can see, pick up groceries, the one before didn't have an S, the one before that was missing the E, and so on. And so we can see it being typed out one character at a time. There's probably a better way to write this particular test, but I think this is a good place to leave it at this moment. The other design flow that I think is something that people do is that you test after the fact, and perhaps this is more useful with more complex functions and state and actions within applications. But I do think personally, just like thinking through it, just from the little we've done here, I like the idea of writing tests before you build the component. One thing about code that I'm finding is that the more prep you do before the actual building, the smoother the building goes. I think this is kind of part of the paradigm that TypeScript introduces. We're correctly typing things, and instead of just building something and then running into errors that we have to then debug later, we're saving future time by taking a bit more time now to correct type things and set them up. So even though TypeScript can be kind of cumbersome or annoying to work with at times, I do think it ultimately saves time. And I'm starting to feel the same way about unit testing. That said, I was talking to Spencer about this a couple of weeks ago, and one thing he mentioned to me is that he was talking to a senior dev that said, really, you should be writing tests after, well, when you're first getting started with unit testing, you should be writing tests after you build just to confirm that things work correctly, and that over time, you will see how these patterns work out. And after you have some experience with testing, it'll be a lot easier to do the forecasting method where you're actually building the test before building the component. Because when you first get started with testing, and I can definitely attest to this, is that it's really hard to understand what should I be testing? What should I be checking on? How granular do I go? Is it important to also test how the UI looks as well as how it operates? These are all important things to consider, um, and that's what we're here to do. So uh, today we tested after the fact, though we did kind of develop alongside. I probably could have written this test first and then gotten around to making all the changes that I made earlier. We might have found out just by writing the test first and then trying to run it that our components weren't working the way that we intended. Um, but development happens at your own speed. Okay, so with that said, oops, let's return back to our app. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. Right now, we don't have since the deletion was happening from my Postman. We don't have a method that automatically checks the database every so often and makes an API call. In fact, I don't even think we would really want that flow. That's too many API calls to be making. But once we actually have like a delete function integrated, meaning into the UI, some option where I can click it and delete a specific to-do item, it won't really be able to know and update this list. So we'll have to refresh it and manually delete until then. But maybe that's something Spencer and I will work on next time. I look forward to his return. 1 week from today, we'll be back at it, doing our stream, same time, same place. And we'll continue building our lovely, lovely to-do app. I'm really liking the way it operates and looks right now. For the rest of you out there, I hope you have a good weekend, and everybody take care. Peace.